It was one of those cold mornings when even the sun looked tired. The world outside Emily Carter's small apartment felt heavy, gray, and distant. She stood in her kitchen staring into her thin wallet, only $12 left until payday. Her 6-year-old son, Noah, sat at the small wooden table eating the last piece of bread with a little butter spread unevenly across it. "Mom, are we going to the park after school today?" he asked with innocent hope. Emily smiled, trying not to let her exhaustion show. "Maybe tomorrow, sweetheart. Mommy has to work a little extra today." She kissed his forehead, walked him to the bus stop, and waved as the school bus disappeared down the wet street. The wind carried the smell of rain and coffee from a nearby cafe. For a moment, Emily just stood there, tightening her coat against the chill, her mind already racing about unpaid rent and overdue bills. Her life had become a routine of survival. Early mornings, late nights, and dreams she no longer allowed herself to chase. By mid-morning, after finishing her first shift at the diner, Emily stopped by the small cafe across the street to buy herself a cup of coffee. Just one small luxury before diving back into the chaos. The place was warm, filled with chatter and the comforting hum of espresso machines. She stood in line behind a man wearing an old gray coat, his hair messy, his hands shaking slightly as he searched his pockets. When it was his turn, he looked embarrassed. The barista said, "That'll be $4.85. But the man kept patting his coat, realizing he didn't have enough. A few people behind them sighed in irritation. Emily could feel his shame. She'd been there before. Without hesitation, she stepped forward. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'll pay for it." The man looked at her in surprise. "You don't have to." She smiled. "I know. But I want to." She handed the cashier a $5 bill. The man looked at her for a long second, his eyes glistening. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means." "It's just coffee," she said with a small laugh. He nodded, whispered something under his breath, and walked out into the rain. She thought nothing more of it. Just a small act of kindness in a world that often forgot to care. That evening, Emily returned to her shift at the diner. The smell of grease and coffee clung to her uniform, and her boss barked orders from the kitchen. Her feet ached and her back throbbed, but quitting wasn't an option. Rent was late again. She took her 10-minute break sitting outside, scrolling through her phone for extra part-time jobs. The glow of the screen reflected in her tired eyes as she whispered to herself, "Just a few more weeks. Things will get better." She thought of Noah sleeping at home, of the little things she wished she could give him. But no matter how hard she worked, life always seemed one step ahead, keeping her just above water. That night she returned home and tucked Noah into bed. The city was quiet outside her window. She sat by the sill, sipping water from a cracked glass, and stared at the distant city lights. She didn't know it yet, but everything in her life was about to change before the next sunrise. The following morning started like any other. Emily made breakfast, helped Noah with his backpack, and kissed him goodbye at the bus stop. She was clearing the small kitchen table when she heard a strange sound. It started faint, a hum in the distance, then grew louder until the walls began to tremble. Glasses rattled in the cupboard. "Mom!" Noah shouted, covering his ears. Emily ran to the window and froze. A helicopter was descending right over their street. Dust and leaves spun wildly through the air as neighbors came outside, pointing and shouting. The helicopter landed in the empty lot beside their building. Written on the side in bold silver letters were the words, "Henderson Enterprises." Emily's heart pounded. Henderson Enterprises was one of the largest companies in the country. Real estate, technology, and global charity work. What could they possibly want here? The helicopter door opened, and a man in a black suit stepped out, followed by another man. One Emily recognized instantly. It was him, the same man from the cafe. But this time, he wasn't wearing an old coat. He wore a sleek, tailored suit, and his posture was calm, confident, powerful. The suited man walked straight toward Emily's apartment and knocked on her door. She opened it cautiously, holding Noah's hand. "Ms. Carter?" the man said with a kind smile. "May we have a moment of your time?" Emily nodded uncertainly. "I'm James Henderson," the man said. "Yesterday you bought me a cup of coffee." Her jaw dropped. "You're that man?" she whispered. He nodded. "Yes. Yesterday I had one of the hardest mornings of my life. I had just come from the hospital after visiting one of our community centers. I was tired, frustrated, and honestly losing faith in people. And then you, a stranger, stepped forward and helped me without hesitation. You didn't know who I was. You didn't ask for anything. You just cared. Emily's eyes filled with confusion and disbelief. It was just coffee, she said softly. James smiled gently. It was more than that. It reminded me why I started helping people in the first place, and I realized I hadn't been doing enough. So I wanted to start with you. His assistant stepped forward and handed Emily a folder. Inside were legal papers. This, James said, is the deed to a cafe we own on Elm Street. It's fully paid for, and it's yours. I'd like you to run it, to build your own future. No conditions, no contracts. Just a gift. Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I can't accept this. I didn't do anything special. James smiled. You reminded me what real kindness looks like. That's special enough. Noah tugged her sleeve and whispered, Mommy, is this real? She knelt down, holding him close. I think it is, baby. I think it really is. In the weeks that followed, Emily's life transformed. She opened her own cafe, a small, cozy place she named Noah's Corner. It had warm lights, the smell of fresh pastries, and a little reading nook for kids. People loved it, not just for the coffee, but for the kindness that filled every inch of the place. Emily hired other single parents who needed a chance. She never forgot the struggles she'd faced, and she wanted her cafe to be a home for those still trying to rise. James often visited quietly, sitting at the corner table with a smile, watching how Emily had turned one small moment into something extraordinary. They became friends, often talking about ways to help the community. Emily's days were still busy, but now her work came with purpose. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Emily stepped outside her cafe, wiping her hands on her apron. James joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. Funny, he said, smiling, that all of this started with one small cup. She laughed softly. I guess kindness really does come full circle. They stood in silence, watching families pass by, children laughing, the sky glowing orange. Months later, Emily was invited to speak at a charity event organized by Henderson Enterprises. Standing on stage, she faced a crowd of hundreds, her voice trembling at first, but growing steadier with every word. When I paid for that coffee, I never thought anything of it. I just saw someone who needed help. But that small act changed everything. Not because of money or luck, but because it reminded me, and maybe reminded him, that kindness still exists. She paused, glancing at James in the front row. We never know what battles someone else is fighting. Sometimes a simple gesture can give hope where it's been lost. The world doesn't change all at once. It changes in these tiny moments when we choose compassion over judgment. The audience rose to their feet, applauding. Tears glimmered in Emily's eyes as James walked up afterward and said softly, You didn't just change my day, Emily. You changed my life. She smiled. I think we changed each other's. That night, Emily returned home to Noah, who snuggled beside her on the couch. Mom, he murmured sleepily, when I grow up, I'm going to buy coffee for everyone. She laughed and kissed his forehead. That's my boy. Outside, the city lights shimmered, and somewhere far away, a helicopter passed silently across the sky. But this time, it didn't frighten her. It reminded her that miracles don't always arrive from the heavens. Sometimes they begin with a cup of coffee and a kind heart, because no act of kindness is ever wasted. Sometimes it just takes time to come back to you, multiplied by love, hope, and a little bit of faith.